Spring's thaw arrived in Green Hollow Forest like a roaring chorus. Warm rains melted the winter snows high in the mountains, sending torrents of water roaring down the River Wisp. Along its winding banks, the centuries-old Beaver Dam, once a marvel of interlaced timber and tightly packed clay, pressed back the swollen current into a series of tranquil ponds and marshes. Those still waters were the lifeblood of the forest, home to frogs and dragonflies, grazing ground for deer, and nursery for minnows and otters alike. But on the dawn of the first flood, young Baxter the beaver sensed something was wrong. He padded across the dam's crest, paws splashing in shallow water, breath misting in the cool air. Where once the logs formed a seamless barrier, now he found thin, dark gaps between timbers and the steady hiss of water leaking through. A long willow branch, part of last year's repair, had warped under the weight of ice, leaving a fissure wide enough to let precious water slip past. Baxter's heart pounded as he followed the leak downstream. Below the dam's face, a sheet of muddy water gushed over the bank, carving rivulets into the soft earth. Lily pads and reeds downstream, signs of a healthy wetland, had begun to drift away in the current. River otters, normally playful, watched anxiously from the shallows. Schools of minnows darted desperately for cover. Even the woodland birds seemed to hush their morning songs in alarm. He climbed onto the highest log of the dam, bracing his broad tail for balance, and surveyed the damage under the pale gray sky. Large stones that once anchored the base had shifted, mud packing the dam's core had washed into the river like fine silt. Any further breach would let the river carve a new channel, emptying the ponds and draining the marshes that hundreds of creatures depended on. Baxter's whiskers quivered with a mixture of fear and resolve. This dam was his family's legacy, built by his grandparents, maintained by his parents, and watched over by generations of Beaver engineers. Now its very foundation teetered on collapse. He felt the weight of responsibility settle heavy on his shoulders. Gathering his courage, Baxter leaped down the dam face and paddled to the shore. With a firm slap of his tail on the water, he summoned his siblings and the nearby muskrats. "The dam is failing," he announced, voice steady despite the rushing water. "If we do nothing, Green Hollow's heart will run dry. We must act now." As his small congregation of friends and family looked toward him, Baxter knew their next hours would decide the fate of the forest itself. That evening, as the last pale light of dusk faded from the sky, Baxter slipped into the cool sanctuary of his family lodge. The interior was dim but cozy, walls of interwoven sticks and mud, softened by layers of moss and lined with smooth stones. Flickering fireflies drifted through small ventilation holes, casting dancing shadows across the damp floor. Here, far from the dam's leaking crest, Baxter could think. He settled beside his grandfather's old engineering bench, a stout slab of cedar trunk worn smooth by generations of beaver paws, and ran his claws lightly over the faded notches and grooves left by countless repairs. With a slender sapling stick, he traced the knot patterns his ancestors had once carved into the wood, studying the interlocking weave that gave the dam both flexibility and strength. Memories of his father's patient lessons came back. How to tie a double-lock weave and layer alternating poles to deflect water pressure. Dipping the sapling into a shallow puddle of river ink, made from crushed berries and clay, Baxter sketched his plan on a flattened piece of bark. The blueprint took shape in precise lines, a reinforced core of paired willow poles arranged in a herringbone pattern, held together by stout cross stakes driven deep into the riverbed. Between each pair of poles, he would pack clay and sediment, then overlay a lattice of flexible twigs to prevent washout. Along the dam's base, large flat stones, wedged like keystones, would anchor the entire structure against rushes of floodwater. Satisfied, Baxter scurried outside to gather his crew. His two younger sisters, Maple and Hazel, emerged from their lodge entrance, eyes bright with curiosity. A nearby family of muskrats, hearing Baxter's call, paddled over through the marsh grasses. "We have work to do," he announced, voice firm. "We must source straight willow saplings for our poles, smooth stones for ballast, and clayrich mud for packing." Under Baxter's direction, the group set out along the riverbank. Maple and Hazel dove into thickets of young willows, selecting the straightest, most pliable branches. The muskrats ventured into shallow riffles, retrieving flat river stones and burrowing into banks for pockets of dense clay. All the while, Baxter oversaw their efforts, reminding them to replant cuttings where they pruned saplings and refill burrow entrances the muskrats disturbed. By nightfall, they returned to the lodge, hauling bundles of willow, baskets of clay, and flat stones balanced deftly on muskrat backs. Baxter inspected each load with a critical eye, imagining how each element would slot into his blueprint. As he drifted to sleep that night, the river's roar felt less threatening. In his mind, he had already begun to mend the heart of Green Hollow. The following morning, a pall of mist clung to the river wisp as Baxter led his team downstream to gather the materials outlined in his blueprint. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and budding spring growth, but under the veneer of renewal lurked the sobering power of the swollen river. Every bank they approached echoed with the roar of rushing water. Selecting willow saplings. Baxter guided Maple and Hazel to a stand of young willows on the river's inner bend, where the current carved shallow eddies. The sisters dove into the thicket, teeth gnawing through bark to release long, straight poles. Under Baxter's watchful eye, they snapped each sapling at its base, then carefully placed cuttings from the trimmed branches into the soft soil, ensuring new growth would spring in its place. With each snip, the wind teased the young leaves, as if whispering encouragement. Harvesting flat stones. Next, the muskrats paddled into the shallow riffles where stones had been smoothed by winter's ice. They dove beneath the foaming surface, emerging with broad, flat river rocks balanced deftly on their backs. The current tugged at them, but their webbed feet held firm. Baxter commended their bravery. These stones will lock our dam's foundation. Never forget how vital your courage is. Scooping clay-rich mud. Their final task brought them to a steep bank where spring runoff had exposed veins of dense, clay-laden earth. Baxter knelt at the water's edge and plunged his paws into the sludge, molding the heavy clay into compact clumps. The muskrats joined him, their nimble paws packing mud into baskets woven from reeds. Every handful of clay slipped through the current's grip to their baskets, but laughter punctuated their work, defiance against the swelling river that threatened their forest home. A near-flood surge. Suddenly, the river surged, an immense wave of meltwater borne from upstream thaw. The current leapt over its banks, swirling around their paws and whiskers. Maple's bundle of willow poles tipped, and Hazel gripped Baxter's tail for stability. The muskrats' baskets floated free, mud washing into the torrent. In that heart-stopping moment, Baxter barked, "Hold tight." He anchored himself with a sturdy branch lodged into the riverbed, pulling his sisters to safety on higher ground and corralling the muskrats back to the bank. Once the surge passed, Baxter surveyed the loss, half the willow poles gone, the clay baskets tattered. Yet he refused despair. "We learn," he told his team, voice steady despite pounding water. "We adapt." Improvised solutions. Under Baxter's direction, the group pivoted to gather sturdier hardwood saplings hidden beneath overhanging pines, whose roots had withstood past floods. They harvested secondary clay pockets in sheltered hollows and sought stones farther upriver where currents were gentler. Though rain began to fall, drumming on leaves and fur, Baxter's resolve shone brighter. He led them onward, undeterred by the river's might. By dusk, their revised stockpile, a thoughtful mix of willow, hardwood poles, flat stones, and clay, rested safely on firm ground. Baxter's heart swelled with pride. In the face of nature's fierce pushback, they had adapted, learning from the river's will. With materials secured, the real work of rebuilding the dam could finally begin. A steady drizzle fell as dawn broke over the breach in Green Hollow's ancient dam, turning each log and tuft of grass into slick glass. Baxter stood at the water's edge, his broad tail lashing in anticipation as he watched the river's swelling current roar through the gap. The once tranquil ponds lay drained below, and the downstream marshes were all but vanished. Around him, the brigade of beavers, muskrats, and otters gathered, fur dripping with rain, eyes bright with determination. Baxter lifted a sturdy willow pole and slotted it into position at the dam's weakened core, explaining in clipped clicks how each element of his blueprint would come together. To his left, his sisters Maple and Hazel wove a herringbone lattice, each sapling snapped and interlaced at precise angles. Their strong incisors carved notches in the poles so the cross stakes locked firmly in place. With every deft twist of willow, the lattice grew thicker, creating the flexible backbone Baxter had sketched in mud. Beside them, the muskrats labored knee-deep in water to pack thick layers of clay and river silt between the willow weave. Their nimble paws pressed the mud into every crevice, molding it around the poles until no gap remained. As they worked, strands of fibrous grass were woven through the wet clay to bind it fast, an old trick the muskrats knew well from burrow construction. Each basketful of mud made the lattice ever more watertight, and each triumphant chirp from the muskrats spurred the others onward. At the dam's base, a team of river otters lugged flat stones, wedged by Baxter's design to form a keystone foundation. They slid slippery rocks into place, one by one, anchoring the entire structure against the relentless force of the flood. When a stone shifted under the current's strain, an otter dove beneath the surging water, righted it, and rammed it home with powerful tail slaps. The river, as though testing their work, pulsed against the new dam wall, but the stones held firm, refusing to yield. All morning and well into the afternoon, the creatures worked in unison beneath the gray sky, rain matting their fur and driving mud into their eyes. Baxter moved constantly between teams, tapping out orders with his tail and offering quick encouragement. Pack more clay here. Weave tighter there. Slide the stones forward. Each time the river surged, the newly rebuilt section shuddered but did not break, proof that Baxter's blueprint was sound. As the sun dipped low and the rain slackened to a drizzle, the final willow lattice was sealed, and the last stone set. The current, once a raging torrent through the breach, slowed to a steady, gentle flow over the dam's crest. Dragonflies, drawn by the restored still water in the upstream pools, fluttered tentatively above the surface. Around Baxter and his team, the forest seemed to exhale in relief. The dam stood whole again, a testament to ingenuity, perseverance, and the unbreakable bond among Green Hollow's creatures. Dawn broke over Green Hollow Forest in a riot of pastel light, the mist rising gently from the newly restored pond behind the dam. Dragonflies hovered in tufts of reeds, their iridescent wings catching the sunrise. Frogs croaked in joyful chorus along the pond's edge, and otterkits slid playfully across smooth stones, their laughter like chirps echoing through the trees. Everywhere life stirred in renewed vibrancy, proof that Baxter's engineering feat had saved the wetland ecosystem. Baxter stood atop the dam's crest, tail flicking with satisfaction as he surveyed the scene. The water level held perfectly, filling the upstream ponds without spilling through the carefully packed willow lattice. Wildflowers, marsh marigolds and blue flag irises bloomed along the banks, their roots anchored in the moist soil Baxter's team had preserved. A family of deer stepped gingerly to the water's edge, lowering their heads to drink, while a red fox paused at the treeline, its bright eyes reflecting the rippling reflections of cattails. Downstream, the marshes had reappeared as if by magic. Toads emerged from soggy burrows, their throats puffing in deep croaks, and minnows darted beneath lily pads in crystal-clear pools. Beavers from neighboring lodges paddled in to inspect the new structure, their whiskers twitching in approval. Even the sentinel herons returned, stalking the shallows for breakfast amid the restored wetlands. The entire forest seemed to breathe easier under Baxter's handiwork. That evening, as the golden glow of sunset filtered through the canopy, the creatures of Green Hollow gathered in a clearing beside the dam. Otters performed tumbles in the shallows, muskrats paraded proudly along the bank, and Baxter's sisters, Maple and Hazel, presented him with a wreath of woven reeds and wildflowers, an honor reserved for the forest's greatest heroes. All eyes turned to Baxter, whose modest whisker twitch thanked each of them for their courage and labor. Under a starlit sky, Marta the owl glided overhead, her silent presence a reminder of the deeper magic that guided the forest. Baxter, heart swelling, realized that his blueprint had not only rebuilt wood and clay but had reinforced the bonds among every creature in Green Hollow. As fireflies drifted like living stars above the water, he closed his eyes and whispered a promise: "Together, we will guard this home, so these waters may flow for generations yet to come." And in the hush that followed, the forest itself seemed to murmur its agreement.